Welcome to Mad Men Men. And in honor of Season 4, which is all about shaking things up creatively and organizationally, here's a brand new intro. So, on Mad Men Men, we don't have a conference table. We gather around in the bullpen to discuss and analyze each episode of the AMC series Mad Men, shared between 2007 and 2015. One of us is a first-time watcher of Mad Men. One of us went through it just once back when it was airing. And then there's me, who rewatches it so often, no one's telling me they think my love of Mad Men is temporary. I'm John Negroni, and I also love sweet potatoes. And Will Ashton, I'm sorry I didn't mention you in the intro just now, but I hope you stop crying and don't leave us to join another podcast.
I was going to say something cute or whatever witty, but I really want to know now how the hell Mike did that when we started the episode. I know the audience couldn't see it,
the listeners have no idea what you're talking about.
Maybe he can care to explain what just happened.
Yeah, stop being such a mysterious salesman. Yes, it is Mike Overholtz. And Mike, your face is a little bit red and blistering. Were you just in Los Angeles?
John, I'll be honest. I feel like that new intro kind of has an expiry date on it. I have a feeling they're not going to be without a conference table for long.
Well, I mean, isn't that just the precariousness of this new season of Mad Men? Things are a little bit, cards to the chest, if you will. If you
insist.
Should we explain? Basically, while I was doing that intro, Mike made a bunch of lasers appear behind him, and it captured Will's imagination in ways that, yeah, he did it again.
How are you doing that? Oh boy, now there's some confetti.
And then, here's the last one.
Oh, it's rain or snow or something.
That's just Apple. You can thank Apple for that.
There you go.
That's not through Riverside. That's through your computer, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I use a MacBook, and just in the latest Apple update on all things, like for FaceTime, if you make certain gestures at the camera, and it makes I don't know, screen effects. There's a bunch. But,
what happens if you put up your middle finger? Like, what comes up then?
Will Ashton appears on the screen.
I can't. Yeah.
So there you go. We gave you a little bit of a Mac tips tutorial to start off this episode. So guys, we're back for season 4. We finished season 3 up pretty strong. I think we had a guest pretty recently. Things have been pretty fun, but we're back. And it's time to get into public relations, which is directed by Phil Abraham, the longtime Mad Men director, as well as Matthew Weiner. This episode aired on July 25th, 2010. Matthew Weiner wrote this episode. Ratings-wise, this is a big one. This is one of the highest rated episodes of the show so far. I think the highest rated up until this point, and yes, I am correct about that. And from this season onward, the ratings for Mad Men are going to be much higher than average. Up until this point, plenty of reasons for that. I think one of the reasons being 2010 is really when the show started to become a little bit more less of, as Mad Men Carousel put it, a cult hit, and start to not just be a critical darling, but actually start to hit the mainstream a little bit more. More people started hearing about this show and watching this show. This is around the time that I started watching the show. So there you go. And yeah, this is a big episode. A lot of big. What stuck out to you guys? We got to start with Will, because what were your expectations going into this season? You really didn't have a sense, right, of this being your first time. What was going through your head?
Well, I mean, it was evident from the last episode that things were going to change, not only in terms of the location and the new agency, and just, a little bit more confined as far as the focus. We're going to probably get some new characters, a little bit more adversity. Obviously, Don's going to be a new man because of the divorce. So, yeah, I mean, I think I knew that there was going to be some sort of change. I mean, the big thing is that there's more of a stylistic change. It seems like, it was said before that, the 60s really kind of became the 60s when JFK got shot, and that kind of awoke this sort of uncertainty for the nation, and this sense of the comfortability that came from the 50s was evaporated. And now there's a little bit of an edginess to this episode. The editing's a little bit sharper, and there's a little bit more, scenes where characters aren't as smooth and confident as they were before. Certainly Dawn's a lot more prickly and prone to being erratic or, even outbursting at certain points. And yeah, I mean, I think, just seeing all the different ways that the show is still Mad Men as we know it, but kind of introducing this new phase, I guess, where it's going to kind of be a little bit more, not maybe spontaneous, but a little bit more prone to trying different things or kind of feeling emboldened to change what we expect the show to be and what these characters are and how we know them. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting way to start this new season.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before, where really the first period of the 1960s, it has hints of what's to come, but it really was still kind of a reaction to the 1950s. So I think that goes with what you're saying of like, then JFK got assassinated and the world kind of had to change. Like, it was forced to change. America had to really kind of, it got turned upside down, as a lot of the last season was kind of playing around with. And it's like stylistically, there's so many different stylistic changes to this episode, down to the costumes, down to like we the office itself, and like going through the whole thing. The musical cues are a little bit different. You can tell everybody is kind of like, it's so interesting how like the clothes that people are wearing are a little bit more expressive, a little bit more fun. We're in Thanksgiving time, so it's been almost a year since the last episode of season 3. So a lot of time has passed, and we're kind of in the winter season again. We're kind of picking up from 1963 winter and then moving on into 1964, going into 1965, which is what this season's going to be covering. And a lot of people will know just from 1965, big year of the 60s for sure. But yeah, I really like the stylistic changes because they are true to the time. I think it's true to the time for the agency to get kind of like disrupted. I'm curious how you feel about that, Mike, because I think that Mad Men would have really gotten stale if like we had just stayed at Sterling Cooper and they hadn't blown up the show,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that struck me the most going back to this. It feels like just such a line of demarcation between before and after this episode and stylistic Mad Men. It just feels so much quicker too in the shots that they're choosing and the plot lines compared to what we're used to. And it just, there's so much like more energy too on screen. It feels like, if you like thinking back all the way to season 1, it just felt like a much different show. And it's really cool when you take into the context of how that actually happened some people could watch it and think, oh, Weiner's just doing this because so many more people are watching it and because we want to make this more commercially successful. But it really does match, as we're saying, the times and the style of 1964, 1965, and what happened. So it's just, I think a perfect combination and so interesting.
And I will say,
I think it is.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you go first, Will.
I just wanted to say real quick, I even though there is like a great sense of uncertainty with the characters and just how they're going to go about this new agency, I do think, at least for me, it feels like this season or this season opener is a lot more confident and a lot more assured of itself and a lot more willing to kind of take risk. Like, it seems like the show feels emboldened to be itself. And not to say that the other seasons weren't that way, but it just seems like the show knows it needs to take those risks and it's willing to do that and knows it has the following that it seems to have now. And it seems like it's livelier.
Well, it's a scrappy upstart. The show is the scrappy upstart that Sterling Cooper Draper Price is now, isn't it? Will, do you like the new title of the company, SCDP?
I mean, it's a lot wordier, but I mean,
it is. So I watched this episode a lot, and I think part of the reason is because it's not even that great of a Mad Men episode. It's a setup episode. It's one of those. We've talked about these episodes before. I really like it though. Like I find it very rewatchable. So I watched this 4 times total. I watched the first time just going through it again, nothing to it. And then I watched both commentaries. The commentary was, the first one I watched was with Matthew Weiner and John Hamm. And then the second one was with, I forget, David Carbonaro, the composer of the show. And I forget the name of the costume designer. I'd have to look it up. But just the two of them, I watched that commentary, which was super fun. They talk way more than like when the actor. And then I watched it a 4th time, just clean through again. And I just like, every time I go through it, it's like that energy is very infectious. In the Matthew Weiner and John Hamm commentary, Weiner says, this is like a pilot. And he feels like, this really, like, you could just start Mad Men with this episode, the whole like show, and it would basically work, honestly. And I have like a little bit of a theory of this. I'm curious if you guys would agree or disagree. I think Matthew Weiner just really likes writing pilots. I think he likes it more. I think he likes writing like self-contained stories a lot more than episodic stories. And I think he gets a lot of help from his writer's room in terms of like long running arcs. Because you can look at that like throughout his whole career. I think the guy, he just really likes to like put things in their own boxes. He wrote a whole anthology, right? Like, what was that thing? The Modern Love thing? Like, every episode was its own story. It was basically like 10 different pilots or however many episodes it was.
Was it the Romanoffs?
Oh, no, the Romanoffs. Yeah, not Modern Love.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, that kind of supports your... Yeah, that supports your theory as far as that. I never watched that. Was that any good?
Some of the episodes were good. Some of them were a little tedious. Yeah. Not going to lie.
Hey, going back to what you're saying, John, I get what you're saying, but I feel like the thing that works about Mad Men is that it does work as a whole show, and it does feel like it was thoughtful all the way through. I think the only time we've even discussed it not feeling that way is between seasons 1 and 2, just because he didn't know if he was going to get a season 2, so he needed to make just a standalone season 1. So, like, I feel like what you're saying could be true, but I'm also saying I don't think it is true. You know what I mean?
But I guess that's why I think that he relies on another plot for, you know, a lot of this stuff. And I think that like he has his own limitations, and I'm just kind of reading in between the lines, but who knows? Who knows really? I'm not questioning the man's talent. Just maybe sort of more seeing like a pattern of like, this is where he feels most comfortable as a writer. But who knows? Maybe my thoughts on that will change over the course of as we do this. But yeah, it's
for sure his strength. It's for sure his strength. You're nailing that.
He writes a killer pilot.
Yeah, I mean, it does surprise me though that like you would think, given Don's history, like this would be the point where he'd be like thriving because he can like reinvent himself and like really truly be like a new guy. Maybe that's coming up later. You know, like the ending suggests that that's where the show's going to go. And obviously you two know more about that than I do, but I was kind of taken aback by how, I don't want to say unstable, but how unsure of himself Don seemed to be. Like the only time he really felt before like that final like pitch, they felt like at ease was when he was on that date with a younger woman, which he was pretty resistant to for obvious reasons to begin with. But like, that's the only time I felt like, okay, this is Don. Like this is the guy I've known the last 3 seasons. And kind of the, you know, the juxtaposition there of, you know, like at the end of season 3, he was like kind of the ringleader, as Peggy was suggesting, the guy was kind of, you know, spearing.
He's the instigator.
Yeah. I was a little surprised that he was so like kind of on unsure ground throughout this episode.
Yeah, I wrote down in my notes that I think he must be frustrated that like you can tell that like the persona that he worked so hard to create, like we see it in the beginning of the episode, he created that persona out of the 1950s, you know, to be this basically the cipher, to be kind of modest, to be don't talk a lot about yourself, as he says, but that's become obsolete. Like it just doesn't work in this new era. And I think he's frustrated. He's like, I have to reinvent myself again. But by the end of the episode, I think what makes the episode exciting is that after all that, he's like, fine, you know, right. I will reinvent myself. I'll be another guy. I'll call up that Wall Street reporter, and I'm just going to be this guy. I'm going to be a little bit more direct, blunt, and I'm going to get what I want and all that.
Yeah. And just to clarify, like this, I know like most of the season openers kind of time jump. This is one of the bigger ones, right? This is like a 2-year jump.
Yeah, this is 11 months. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other big one was between seasons 1 and 2, because we skipped all of like 1961.
I do think it's important to kind of note, though, like when we talk about Don being unsure of himself, he's still great at his job. I mean, just in the world of business, to go from a hotel room to what they do have in the season opener in 11 months is pretty crazy. Like that is,
it is, yeah.
That is, especially for the time. Like, if that happened today, people would be like, oh, that's a unicorn company really well. The fact that it's happening in the 60s and a non-recurring revenue, like, agency, very, very, very successful.
I think it's all about the image, though. It's like, I don't think they're doing great financially, but they are doing well as an agency in terms of, like, getting attention. The Glow Code ad, which I have to bend Will's ear about once we get to it. But, yeah, I would compare that, too, to, like, so we have the date scene with Anna Camp, who plays Bethany, And I just think that like he's trying again, he's kind of an obsolete version of himself where he's trying to like charm her and be like the Don Draper who like wooed Betty, right? She even looks like Betty. And it's not quite like it's not working quite as well. He's strapped as he goes. It's not an unsuccessful date necessarily, but you can tell that he's a little bit like on the back foot on a date where he's having trouble keeping up with this person, and it's kind of like confounding him a little bit. And I think it's what makes him ultimately kind of interested in her, even though, you know, he goes into it being like, oh my gosh, like Roger and Jane set this up. Like, no, thanks. But yeah, I have a lot that I want to get to about that. One thing that I want to mention too. So Weiner and Ham were talking about this, and Weiner said that he wanted to kind of like reboot the whole series. They create a whole new iteration. He said he called it public relations because he wanted to answer this question of like, where is Don now that he's divorced? You know, and that's why they started this during the holidays, Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year and everything, because that's where like divorce is like the most kind of like potent for, you know, everybody, especially the kids, and kind of see that like there's that line in Henry as he's just like, oh, maybe we have more to be thankful for. And I think like Sally and Bobby are just like, yeah, bullshit, dude. Shut the fuck up. Like, like we're trying to eat our food and open our gifts. Like, we hate you. Actually, no, I don't think the kids even hate Henry at all. I think they're just like super indifferent to him, which is so true to life. But anyway, there's also that moment with the journalist from Advertising Age. And I thought this was interesting because there's the moment where he has like he shows the prosthetic leg, right? And when that happens, I always kind of perceived it as like, oh, it's kind of like reminding Don of who he was because he served in Korea, right? And I think that's part of it for sure. But you know what I mean? Of just like, oh, Don is like remembering that like he keeps having to change and all that. Weiner, though, he says that the reason they put that in is because he thought that like the phantom pain of missing a leg kind of resonates with Don because Don, you know, that's how he's feeling during this divorce. That like there's something kind of missing from him and it's like unsettling him, basically. I'm curious what you guys make of that because it is kind of depressing watching this episode. I know I said it's like it's so rewatchable, but you know, our boy Don is in a tough place.
Yeah. It also just like kills me. The thing that got me with it that felt like probably struck a chord in my life is seeing Don having to go back to his own house that they're living in. And that, I think that's just such, Weiner taps into something that's just like so true. And like maybe a lot of people don't think about, but like that feels like such a crucial, painful experience to not just have this phantom limb, have this phantom life, missing your wife, but knowing that he's playing house with your kids in your house and he's still paying for it.
Yeah, it's so messed up. Like and it's like in one way, it's absolutely karma for everything that Don did to Betty and to his kids. Like he deserves all this and more, but it's brutal. And also it's just like, it's so indicative of how Betty just cannot like move on. Like she cannot like do that same thing of like rebooting her life basically and moving on. And even Henry is just like, how do you like, how could we live here? Like, I feel bad for Henry. Like, I don't even like Henry much. I think I'm like the kids. I'm indifferent to Henry completely. But I think that he's just kind of like, you got to feel for the guy when his mom is just like, I don't know how you can stand living in that another man's dirt. I'm like, yeah, dude. Like, I'm sure he hates it. There's a reason they have to fuck in the garage.
Yeah.
It's so weird. Like when he's in the bedroom and like you can tell they changed the bed and stuff. And it's just like, ooh.
Yeah, I mean, I do love that little moment where like Dawn and Henry and Betty are like confrontational and like Henry has to be like, well, he insulted me in his home, but at the same time, he does have a point. You do kind of need to grow up, Betty.
I know you don't want to hear this, but he's right. You suck. But he's just like, you're not even looking. And like, she was supposed to be out a month ago. And it's just like, I think in the commentary, they mentioned this, that like, I think Weiner and Ham are talking about how for Betty, she doesn't want things to change. She just wanted the guy to change. She just wanted to like place in, like playing house was like so apt. She just wanted to switch out the guy, the doll, and everything else stay the same. And I think that's why she's so bent out of shape. Like she can't maintain that. There's a moment where Henry says that.
Okay. She wants commitment Ken as opposed to party Ken.
Dastardly ad guy Ken. Whereas like Don's just like, I'm just Don, you know. Yeah, no.
Why wouldn't you say I'm just Dick? You really missed it. You missed out.
Yeah, there you go. That's better. That's better.
Yeah, good note. Yeah, good note, Mike.
Yeah, I was upset that Dick's the Musical wasn't about Dick Whitman. But yeah, so
who says it's not?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it. I mean, it could very well be for all I know. Yeah,
I don't think anyone has. That's a movie that no people have seen, so we can really control the narrative on.
There you go. So we have the whole thing where they're going through the office and we get to like experience it. I love that entire sequence where like Burt Cooper is just like back to work, you know, it's perfect. And we kind of get like the tour, you know, the actress Alexa something, I forget, who plays Allison, secretary, is back. A lot of the old cast is gone though. David Carbonara said that in the commentaries that he had to like rewrite and tweak the song cue for this a lot because Weiner really wanted it to be special. Will, I know you have some your favorites of the old cast. A lot of people are not here though. There are a lot of notable omissions. Who were you expecting to see anybody as the camera was going? And you were just like, well, where are they? I can think of two people.
I mean, I had some doubt, like when we saw the third season finale, I was like, surely they're not gonna like, you know, get rid of everybody.
And they didn't.
That they, you know. Yeah. Well, no. What I mean though is like the people that they hinted that they were gonna dispose of at the end of that episode. Obviously not.
Still,
like
they didn't because Allison shows up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I kind of just got the sense that like, yeah, this is what I expected going in as far as like, yeah, it'd be some new faces, some familiar faces, at least one or two people that kind of got the axe, so to speak, last time. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Nothing really surprised me. I don't know if I'm fully endeared to this Peggy's work husband guy.
Yeah, they do have that kind of energy, huh? Joey. They had like the little gag they do together, John and Marcia.
Yeah.
It's a really annoying. I hate it.
That is a good shorthand for like, they like or work well together and stuff like it. That's a pretty good shorthand of like establishing time without, you know, showing us the whole thing. But yeah, I don't know. He seems like he's too like, I'm one of the boys, you know what I mean? Like he seems like he's trying too hard to be like, I'm one of the real like regulars, and he just doesn't have that, you know. He has to like earn his stripes a little bit for me.
Well, they kind of hint that he's a freelancer, that he doesn't work every day of the week. And if not Glow Coat, but Sugarberry Ham or something was like a third of his work. And so like, he's not their full on art director, but he is trying to like kind of slot into that Sal spot, which for us is a sore spot. And yeah, I gotta say, he's an interesting character. Mike, what's your, I know we can't say much about Joey further past this episode, but there are some interesting kind of like hints for what's to come, huh?
Yeah.
The way he kind of like talks about Don.
Yeah, 100%. You can kind of see, you know, there's these small little moments where real Joey comes out. And so I'm laughing, I'm smirking over here, Will, just because it's like, it's for your first time through, you know, kind of flagging those things is like, damn, wow, you kind of nailing it, dude. But really, you know, I think when John's asking about, you know, cast members, people in your office, I think what we're asking about, you weren't surprised about Paul, because I mean, that's the big one. I think the show aired that people were like, where the fuck is Paul?
No, I mean, I thought the end of season 3 was pretty clear that Paul's gone. So I didn't really like, I don't know. I'm sure he'll come back at some point, but like
they leave it ambiguous. Well,
yeah.
Excuse me. They leave it ambiguous of why. Why didn't they bring Paul and Ken into the new agency?
Ken was more.
You can head
surprising.
Ken in it.
Yeah, I think Ken was.
Yeah, because Ken has all those accounts, right?
Yeah.
What I think it is, I think they would have brought those guys in. They had the money, and if those guys were willing, and I think in both cases they weren't. I think Paul just decides to sell out and go to McCann, and because they probably couldn't afford him, they could only afford so many people those first few months. You know, like they had to pick and choose. And so, like, even now, right? By the time they would have the resources to pay guys like Ken, Paul, and whoever, or a full-time art director, it would be way too far into the agency's life to like, oh, now we want you. You know what I mean? There's a pride thing in that too. And I think Ken is just like, I'm just going to go to McCann, get my paycheck. We know that he's only in this for the dough, right? It's not really his passion. And so, yeah, I think that to me is where that's my head canon. It's still sad though. Still a bummer.
I'm just also saying, I remember that from the audience's perspective. Like, that was kind of weird. And just because they felt like regular cast members. And so as a regular audience viewer tuning in weekly, that was kind of a shock.
I mean, I will say, like, even the opening credits, like, nothing really changed as far as, like, the design, but, like, seeing the names change instantly even got me a little like, oh, like, this is different now. You know what I mean? Like, it's like...
Isn't it true to life, though?
Yeah.
You can't have the same employees. Like, I mean, some people will stick around forever, Joan, Pete, whatever, but, like, it would be kind of weird if we didn't have shakeups.
I will say, though, as far as the opening credits, I think it would have been nice if they changed the office that the guy jumped from just a little bit. Like, just a little, like, the furniture is a little different, you know what I mean? Like, on a different floor. I don't know, just something to be a little, like it's a little bit shorter down, like, it's not as high as a jump, you know what I mean? Or something like that.
I don't even watch the opening credits, so it's kind of blowing my mind that you have an opinion on this. You don't skip it every time?
No, I don't usually skip opening credits. I'm not like that kind of guy, unless it's like one of those like opening credits where it's like so, and like if it's like
Game of Thrones.
I never watched past the first season, but yeah, I feel like if it's over 2 minutes, with the exception of like Sopranos or something, I'll maybe skip it that one, but it's like a minute long, right? It's not that long for Mad Men.
No, it's not. When you splice in all the audio and stuff from the episode into the intro, it feels longer because you have to find the clips. But we skipped over their kind of like hatchet meeting with the Jansen guys. So instead of having the Jansen guys come to the office, there's this recurring thing in the episode about how we don't have a conference table, and they're a little bit kind of like embarrassed. Like, they're trying to like, roar. They're trying to show that, or try to appear bigger than they are. And they have to take these meetings at like the same hotel that Don does the interview with the Ad Age guy. There's a nice little detail of how the guys who like come in, Weiner says that they're from Portland, the Jansen client guys. And he kind of has this whole thing of where it's like, oh yeah, they came in from Portland, so it's like warmer there. So they decided to dress them in kind of like summery suits, or they're wearing like lighter suits. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, it's something that never would have occurred to me, except that it does serve the story that they are out of place. Like, you can kind of tell this episode, a lot of this episode is about people out of place, even down to when Don and them are walking through this like modern office. They're the ones who kind of look stuffy. They look a little bit like, oh, the big ad guys. The rest of the agency, when we see like Peggy and Joey and them, that's where like you see her at ease. Like, she is loving this. Like, Peggy is in her era right now. Just kind of like coming up with ideas, taglines on the spot. We get to have the whole kind of bullpen now, which is like a room with couches, and it's more creative. It's more indicative of like the future. And it's such an interesting, stark dynamic, because as that stuff's going on, we go into these kind of like stuffy meetings. We go into this kind of weird, like, we got to meet in this office, and Don's like drinking and talking to his divorce lawyer. And it's a very stark contrast, and it serves the episode well, I think.
I mean, no offense to Paul, but I feel like for Peggy, he was kind of dead weight. Like, he was just kind of bringing her down. So now he's gone. It's like, I can just do my thing.
I feel like Peggy has the confidence in this new pilot that Don had in the original Mad Men pilot. They're obviously not as established in their careers or as tenured, but I do think their role in the company itself is very similar.
Yeah, I think she has about 3 years experience at this point, maybe like 3.5 at this point in her career. Dawn had something like 7 years, I want to say, in terms of like getting up to 1960. I forget the exact timeline. It's never 100% established, but in terms of like him joining Sterling Cooper, which is something, Will, that you'll get a little bit more hints of later. So a little tease for that. We don't get a lot, but you can kind of discern from the stuff he has in his office of like the awards he's won. And that's what helps kind of paint the picture of like how he got to this point. He won these awards in like 1957, 1958. And so what have you, right? So yeah, you're right, Mike. You can kind of track how like Peggy's career is kind of similar. There's some parallels there, even if the timeline is a bit different. Kind of interesting that they are. Oh, go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
I was gonna move on to something about Jansen.
Well, I wanted to say, as far as Peggy goes, I feel like her and Pete kind of like scheming behind Dawn's back with this whole like ham thing.
The PR stunt.
Feels very like divorced dad thing for me. Like, you know, kind of like in a way, like obviously we know Sally is a degenerate and she's gonna like cause havoc and burn down the city at one point, but like I do feel like there is a kind of parallel between like Bobby and Sally with Peggy and Pete here, in the sense of like Dawn has already been kind of out of their lives in many respects when he was married. But like now, like they're gone. Like, you know, Sally is kind of, you know, obviously going through some stuff right now. It seems like she is really not handling the divorce as well as Bobby. Like Bobby's just being cute and like, oh, I like sweet potatoes. You know, or whatever at the dinner table.
He wants to be the good kid. He wants to be loved.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I just think the idea of like, you know, Peggy kind of circumventing around Dawn and like Dawn kind of being out of the loop for this, what was once a pretty successful plan, feels like a good parallel for like Dawn just kind of being out of it in the divorce, kind of, you know, walling him in to his office and not really like, you know, feeling connected to the world at this point.
Yeah, you're picking up on something that's going to become even clearer as the season goes on, because you see in this episode, to what you're saying, similar to a divorce, in this new agency, Peggy and Pete, like, they can't just rely on the partners to make money. You know, Pete, I guess at this point is a partner too, I think, but they can't rely on like Sterling and Cooper and Draper and Price. They have to come up, like, for this agency to succeed, they have to step up. They have to grow up a little bit, right? They have to be the grown-ups. And it's kind of similar in a divorce when like the kids kind of have to step up. Sally has to be more responsible. Sally wears the key to get back into the house, right? Like the way that Dawn has to rely on Sally a little bit more, Dawn has to rely on Peggy a bit more. So, well, it's almost like you're really good at analyzing media and noticing things.
Yeah, I was going to say that you've nailed two things in this episode, bro. Way to go, man. Way to go.
Oh, thank you guys. I appreciate that.
But but I will say the Pete and Peggy thing, it totally is like we need to be, you know, the grown up, like more like the partners. Well, you shook your hand off camera, Will. Pete is a partner. He's just an unnamed partner.
Fair. Okay.
But it is one little rascal's ass plan, dude. Like they might as well have like stacked each other on their shoulders with a big trench coat and like gone to the streets and been like, yeah, exactly.
Sugarberry ham sure is great. Well, no, it is. It's like very resourceful. It's sort of like Pete's whole role in it is like, I'm going to get a case to this guy. And it's like, it's very underhanded of like, but that's how this agency, you can see like hints of how this agency has gotten to where it is. Not by full on, like a lot of it's been luck, but and not a lot of it has been just straight up like talent and creative. It's been Pete being like, there's this guy that I bribe with alcohol at NBC in order to get discounts. I mean, that's kind of, you know, what we're dealing with here. There's a whole conversation that Dawn and Pete have is so interesting because you really see how far along Pete has come in his confidence, where he's talking to Dawn. He doesn't let Dawn just shout him out of the room. He's a little bit more of just like, hey, look, we got to play ball with these guys. Like we got to, you know, there's a little bit more of like a repertoire, a sort of like a back and forth of like how these guys are going to try to like make the business work. I was going to mention before of how, you know, because they are pitching somebody like Jansen, guess what? That means they don't have playtex anymore, right? The episode Maidenform was kind of about when they had like the Jackie Maryland stuff. You know, they used to have a Brazzers account. They don't anymore. I think it's interesting, by the way, that like the whole Brazzers thing gets brought up. Two things on this. In Maidenform, Madman Carousel brought this up, that Don kind of was just like, he was a bit of the prude back in that season when he was talking to Betty about the bikini. And then in this one, he's a little bit of just like, what's up with these guys? Like, don't you want to see a girl's, you know? But and on top of that, though, there's a whole scene with the prostitute where he doesn't want her to take off her brassiere, right? And when you watch that, I think part of you might be a little bit like, oh yeah, the censors, you know, there's just, you know, but then why draw attention to it? And I think that it is Don just sort of, you know, I think that he's a creative guy. I think he's always bringing stuff into his work, even sex. And I think part of him is using this. Maybe this is out of pocket, but like, I think that Don wants her to wear the bra because maybe he has that on his mind, the Jansen thing. Is that wild to suggest?
Well, I mean, if he doesn't have much in the way of a personal life at this point, it's probably more going into the professional. So I don't think it's easier for him to separate the two. Not that he really was able to separate the two much to begin with, but like now that like there's not going on a lot for him in his personal life, he needs a kind of professional life to benefit him, which is why I think he takes like a lot of the like stuff more personally, and that's why it's maybe a little bit more edgy, is that like he has more at stake here now than he ever did before.
His work-life balance is completely out of whack. Yeah. And he has more stake financially because he has to pay for this house and all this stuff. You can tell he's stressed out about it. They mention in the commentaries that the apartment he has in the village is extremely expensive. Like for an apartment to be that big in that neighborhood, to have that extra room for the kids, to have its own kitchen, he's paying a lot of money right now. And so I think that also speaks to like this is no joke to this guy. Like he's putting everything on the line for this agency because he has a lot of money, but he had to put a lot of money, a lot of his like, finances into this. And so, yeah, he's working the weekends. Like the kids are watching that kid with the show with the blind kid, and he's working. He's constantly taking his work out, and he's not just gallivanting and drinking all the time, for sure.
I mean, his accountant is visiting him. You know what I mean? Like that is really indicative. I think that's just a really good way to show he's concerned about his finances without him having some weird scene where he's like talking about how stressed he is about his finances.
No, exactly. Yeah, we don't see him being like, I'm going to the printers. Like, no, he's working his ass off right now. Yeah. I like how Pete is like really on Don's side a lot, and he's kind of figured out Don. In the commentary, they kind of said that like if the show did start at this place, Pete is kind of that confidant role, which is so interesting because of like where he started as this kind of wanted Don's job. Now you see him more, to keep that phrase going, more at ease in his role, understanding like what he's good at. But John Hamm said you could see this conversation like that Pete and Don are having happening between Roger and Don in season 1, which is really fascinating and Roger in this episode is also pretty interesting. He also is a little bit sort of like, he's not taking this whole thing super seriously. He's more interested in like Don's love life, which I wonder if that's part of like the show kind of commenting on like the 2 reasons to watch the show are for like the advertising and the, the work stuff. But then you also watch it like, well, who's Don going to smooch? That kind of thing.
I also like that. I mean, I think there's other signs of this throughout, but like you can kind of see the time change in a sense of like Roger usually would have like he still is using like a double entendre with like the stuffed thing, but it's a little bit more coarse than I think he would be even like, 1 or 2 seasons prior.
Yeah. The butter squirts everywhere.
Yeah. It seems like, I don't know, like he's maybe even adapting better to the new times than maybe Don is. Maybe it's because he has such a young wife that like he's able to be a little bit more hip with it, I guess. But like, I don't know. It's just, it is gross, but it is also like, it seems like Roger is more at place with like how the tides are changing.
Yeah, he blew up his life in season 2 and reinvented. And, so yeah, you're right that Roger is a little bit like, there's more to him than meets the eye. You know what I mean? He's a little bit of like a Superman character where he takes the glasses off. He's no longer Clark Kent. He's good at code switching is what I'm trying to say. The whole thing where Peggy and Joey are talking about the sugarberry ham in that scene, and they do the John, Marsha. So that's a reference. I don't know if you guys picked up on this. Stan Freberg, which is something I wasn't really aware of. I didn't learn this when I was studying advertising, but Stan Freberg, big name. He was called like the funniest guy in advertising by Ad Age. This ad was something that started as like a nightclub act, and then it became like this kind of ad. And so that's what they're referencing. Again, I find it very annoying, like that they keep doing this bit, but I do like that. Well, you called it shorthand of like, you're kind of showing that like these two have a rapport, but you're doing it without saying it. Like you're doing it without being like, that's Joey. Joey and I are tight. We go back. Like you don't have to do any of that stuff. You just kind of get to, weasel it in, which I like.
whenever you came to this agency in October of 1961, I was a little resistant about you. However, you really showed your stripes when, yeah.
I just feel like you were just critiquing like a Scorsese like voiceover. That's
yeah. There you go. Ever since Joey came around, I knew I wanted to be an advertising executive. Yeah, and John Hamm says, Joey's been around enough. He isn't beholden to the old ways of kowtowing when it comes to Don. And the way that he's a little bit more of like, I'm gonna, take a little bit of a shot at Don. I think it's interesting that like throughout the episode, Peggy and Don are in a different place. Like Pete, she's standing up to him. It is kind of like they're his kids. Like this is something that I think becomes even more as the show goes on. But like she is like Sally, like when Don kisses Sally on the head, Sally gets a little grossed out. You see like a hint that Sally's kind of growing up. She's becoming a little bit more resistant to like what her parents tell her. Peggy and Pete are exactly the same, where like Peggy is a little bit like, you know what, Don, like, fuck you, dude. Like, but the image of the agency is right where you left it because you're the one who messed up. The whole line that Burke Cooper has where he's like, your job is to turn, stuff into business for this agency. And you failed. I love that line so much because it is just sort of like Don can't just get away with this stuff anymore. I love it.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing that stood out to me with this episode is how quickly Don gets short with Peggy. Like he just is more quickly like
treats
even
her
maybe
like a
more
teenager.
so. Yeah, maybe even more so with anyone else in the agency. And maybe that's going back to like the stuff he says in like season 3 or whatever, where he's like, I see you more than just a peer or whatever, whatever. But yeah, it just seems like I was really kind of taking like, man, like Don's really taking Peggy to cleaners here. Like he's just really like snapping at her and like giving her the business. And yeah, it bummed me out a bit.
But I mean, that is, I think, true, unfortunately, when you do have like trust in relationship. Like it makes me think of like my own personal relationship. Like I think me and Hannah could probably be pretty rude to each other at certain times, but it's because we know like the other person isn't going to like leave, right? Like
Don there's a comfort level.
Yeah, Peggy is on his side, and she is telling Don to fuck off at certain points, but she's also defending him when Joey's making all the comments about it, right?
She's like, hey, don't say that about my dad, bitch. Chop, chop.
My
Joey.
dad will beat you up. Even
yeah, exactly. The whole thing where she brings her boyfriend Mark up to like, it's just so
fiance.
Yeah, when he says that, you're just like, oh my gosh, like this guy is such a toad. Will, what's your read on Peggy's new boy toy?
Thought he was a bit of a non-entity until
You're echoing the costume designer and David Carbonara in the commentary. Okay. They're just like, that's not going to last long, is it? Well, we'll see.
3 for 3.
Non-entity, because they even say they're just like, wow, he's like, there's just nothing to that guy. But I guess that's the point.
I love Don's line though of like, why bring
who are you?
If you don't want him involved.
All right, yeah, but he's just like, who are you? It's just like, yeah, like his daughter brought up her boyfriend, and he's just like, there is even the whole thing where he's just like, since when do you have a fiance? Like you could tell he's a little bit like, all right, gossip time, like also, tell dad, what happened.
Doesn't he feel so big in the frame though? Like I don't think John Hamm is that much bigger than those two people, but he felt huge in that in the shot,
right.
and like in the door frame.
Yeah, the camera's nailing it in terms of like showing how he looks to her. Like we are in Peggy's perspective because we're just like, okay, Peggy, like you got this. Like, because they're in a bit of a jam, with the whole Sugarberry incident. Which by the way, I love that scene with like the two actors. They're just like, you hurt me. And like the way that Pete reacts to the whole thing. It's pretty great. It's pretty great. There was a whole thing in the commentary too about how John Hamm was talking about this, and Weiner was kind of saying, it's like, I've seen so many times like stunt people, like when one person overdoes it, like that's so common.
Okay, Mia Goth. Reference.
Damn.
Wow.
That's gonna date the episode when this comes out in July.
Peggy has a new look. Weiner said that when he told Elizabeth Moss that she doesn't have to have bangs anymore, she was really excited. But yeah, Peggy has like a new hairdo. She's a little bit more, again, like she's kind of like drinking in the office more. She's just way more creative. They mentioned that this office is more communal. There's more of like a free flowing atmosphere for the creative. And it's just really, I don't know. I really love the vibe of it. And there are sometimes when I like rewatch the show and we go back to the old Sterling Cooper and I get a little nostalgic. I'm just like, oh yeah, this office was a little bit different. I felt a little bit more secure. Like the agency wasn't just going to explode at like any moment. But when you're in the old Sterling Cooper, but then I get excited all over again when we go to this new place.
Yeah, I mean, I like the new office. I like I don't think it's like I don't think it's a oneer, but like when we kind of follow into the office and it's like we're keeping with the conversation, but like oh, here's this office and like here's what this looks like. And yeah, I thought that was real neat.
Yeah, it's like a revolving door almost of certain things. We get a sense of like how small scale they are. They have one floor and they have kind of this like fake second floor that they talk about. And Don kind of sets the stakes for us. He's just like, Weiner has 6 floors of creative they can throw bodies at. It's a bit of an exposition line, but it really gives you a sense of like how small they are right now and how the kind of like the politics of this stuff totally works. Now,
Harry's pretty bummed that's only 1 floor because he can't recreate the beginning of the opening and commit suicide.
Oh, yeah. That I think that was probably like a little sneaky reference to like people watching the show when it was airing of like, I think,
that was a little heavy-handed. That's kind of what I was trying to get at. Is I felt it was a little like
it's Harry. He sucks.
Yeah.
He's dramatic, a little whiny. But you can tell the guy loves showbiz. I mean, at this point, he is very like in that world firmly. A big question for you guys, because a lot of this episode, we are sort of catching up on like where Don is at. And we get a lot of like where he's at with the agency. That's how things start. It's a little bit more ambiguous where he's at romantically, There's this whole thing of like, why is it harder for him to kind of, date at this point? He cheated so much. Right. There's a common sentiment, at least around this time, that like, and maybe it's true today. Some people say that it's easier for men to, if you're like married, basically to, hook up, that women are, it's a little bit more taboo though when you're divorced and, women might find you less viable as an option, essentially, which it's a very weird thing. It's a very weird dynamic, not something we can really I think dive into since we're guys and I think that dynamic, I've never, dated a married person, but I have seen it happen. I've seen, guys who are married and I've known people like women who've dated married men. I know men who've dated married men and it's very, I don't know. It's a very strange thing to me, but I think that there's something underneath it, I guess. But the big question for you guys is like when this was asked in commentaries, like why do you think Don is so resistant to this kind of like dating thing? Like when Roger kind of brings it up to him, and why do you think that he's just kind of, like it seems like he just doesn't want to, but what do you guys think?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think, like he even says when he's with Anna Camp, like something along the lines of like, I haven't done this in a while or something like that. Like to me, that suggests that like, he's not really, I mean, obviously his conversation with Roger also suggests this, that he's not really looking. Cause I think, kind of like we were talking about before, I think he's just so focused on his work. And there is something also, I think, with the fact that he's like still paying for the house and stuff like that. Not that he's like not over Betty necessarily, but I feel like there's a sense of like, he can't really move on. And that's also kind of supposed to be like, he can't really escape the 50s persona a bit. Like, I think he's still like, he's kind of resistant to be in the new age and the new era. And I think that's maybe where that's kind of getting into it, is that like he's, I don't know, just not fully comfortable making that leap. But the end of this episode does suggest that that's probably going to happen pretty soon.
Yeah, like he's coping, essentially. Like he's grieving, and it's like he can't even wrap his head around that kind of thing because his reality's been so shaken up. What do you think, Mike? Do you completely disagree?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's just why would he? I think he marries Betty in the first place just because of the Don Draper persona, not because he actually wants to be married and have a life with someone. And in fact, what does Don Draper or Dick Whitman actually want? He wants to have meaningless sex with people to spur ideas to help him in his workplace. And that's the biggest thing in his life right now is, the new company. And so why date? He could just have sex with women of the night and, get
I think
everything
he's more
he needs out of
conflicted
it.
though than you're letting on. like, I think there is something to that of like the Dick Whitman of him is exactly what you're saying. But I do think part of him is just feels a little bit like, is that all there is? You know? And I think that's why he, from the get-go, was like trying to like build some kind of like life. It does relate to his business too, doesn't it? Like, he doesn't just want to kind of like float through an agency and be like a cog. He kind of wants to create stuff.
I mean, I think if he
create some babies,
I think if he wanted to just settle down at this point, he would have gotten with what's her name, the school teacher.
Well, no, they broke up.
But
he's not going back to that well.
I guess. Yeah, I don't know. But
Don Draper does not double back.
Yeah.
No, I mean that's his personality. I don't think he would. He wouldn't go back to Hilton. You know, when they needed him, like he's very much a person who's like, it's done, and that speaks to like how he's trying to move on to this new agency, how he's trying to move on to this new persona in the real 60s. Yeah, John Hamm had a really good answer, I think, to this question, and I thought was really interesting because I was like, oh wow, this kind of illuminates the episode for me. So John Hamm said, when you feel like a traumatic experience was your fault, you want to punish yourself and hold out on yourself. Roger doesn't believe in that at all. He's like, what's your problem? Let's move on. It'll be fine. But Don is a very different person. His head is in a different place. And fundamentally, he feels responsible for the mistakes he's made in his life. And Matthew Weiner said, I could not agree with you more. I think that's really interesting because I didn't really pick up on that idea that he's punishing himself. But it does kind of connect to when he's with the prostitute. He wants a prostitute to hurt him. He wants to be slapped. You know, he kind of, I think part of him, like, genuinely, like, I don't want to say gets off on the punishment, but I think he feels like it's part of how he is going to get over this, that he has to kind of like, he has a very low self-esteem. And I think that speaks very much to depression. I think that is a very common reaction for people when they do go through something like this, where they feel like they don't deserve to be happy. And it takes them time to kind of grow into that. And so, yeah, I think that's really interesting. John Hamm knows a character better than us, that's for sure. But yeah, I thought that was cool.
Don, is this the first mention we get of Ted Chow?
It is
Shaw?
CGC, which we can't really say much about, but you know, a little bit of a hint that there's another agency that is kind of similar to them in terms of like where they're at. So we'll have to put a pin on that. But yeah, that's a good call for Will. You know, might not be the last year of those folks. There's the whole thing where Don makes the bed, and they talk about how like that comes from his military background. He kind of, but also that like he has a routine. I think that like you need a routine when you're by yourself. I know we've talked about this before, where like, you know, when you're by yourself, or like your spouse or significant other or whoever is out of town or something like that. As guys, sometimes we can kind of fall into these patterns. And I think, Mike, you gave that story of like how for you it was like 6 to 8 hours of like, oh, this is cool, come back. Like, I miss you.
Yeah, I got like I have like 2 fast food meals and like 1 movie in me before I'm like, oh, that's actually all I needed.
Yeah. It's just like, you know, but yeah, it's like, and then you kind of just do stuff around the house because you're kind of like, what do I do? Like, I want the person. Yeah, I want my person back. Also, Weiner kind of says that Don also probably wants the place to look good if he brings someone back to it, but he doesn't hook up with the Anna Camp character, with Bethany. What do you guys make of this whole interaction? Because like they're on a bit of a date, and it's at a real restaurant, or based on a real restaurant called Jimmy LaGrange that Lisa Albert, who we've talked about, apparently like clued them in on. But yeah, where do you guys? How do you? What is this? You know, like, she's younger than him, like a bit younger. Weiner claims that it's kind of a coincidence that she looks so much like January Jones. But what do you all make of that?
I feel like it's Don getting to decide if he actually does want to create a new life and, you know, join the rest of the world and progression in the 60s, or revert, which, you know, kind of funny. We were just talking about, you know, Don doesn't double back, but I think it's, without giving him like a literal path with, you know, like a road with not forks, it's kind of representing that.
But does he see her as Betty 2.0, to what you're saying? Like, in terms of like, I could do this all over again, right? I literally like the same kind of person, somebody who was a model, actor, or whatever, in their early 20s. She mentions that college wasn't far away from her. Does he want to go down that path again? That's the thing.
I mean, I'm sure that comparison is in his mind. I don't know if he's, I don't know. I guess my answer would be like yes and no. Like, I feel like there is a part of him that sees Bethany as like a new start, but not in the way of like, I'm just going to repeat what I did before, but rather just kind of like, this is an option and we kind of get along. And like, she seems like she's a little bit more willing to kind of like call Dawn out than Betty ever really was. So there's kind of a sense that like she's a little bit more free spirited, a little bit more independent and whatnot. Like she also orders the meal in a way that I feel like Betty would never really do that. Like, so there's like little changes there, obviously, but but yeah, I also think that like, yeah, in his mind, there's a part of him that's just kind of like, yeah, I mean, if this were to work out, if I keep seeing this woman, it is kind of like, it could be the start of like, you know, kind of a Betty 2.0. But yeah, I think it's a yes and no.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like Betty may have been a little bit more adventurous like that back in that time. We kind of know her as she is now, but who's to say? There's a nice little tidbit where John Hamm mentions how when they were shooting this episode, the paparazzi thought that Anna Camp was January Jones. And that's why he brings it up. And Matthew was like, I didn't even think of the similarities, like when he casted her, you know? And so make of that what you will, I guess. Yeah. And then there was something else too that I wanted to mention about their whole, like the way that when they end their date and that hotel I thought was interesting. It's called the Barbizon. That's actually like a pretty famous, like, hotel kind of like, or apartment thing for young women who are unmarried. So you'll probably notice it brought up in other things. Sylvia Plath lived there at one point, and I think it shows up. It's a nice little extra thing there. I don't know too much else. Hi leaves the agency. Pretty sad. I thought that
it sounded like he was crying.
Yeah, it did. I think that it's interesting how we see Peggy in this episode being the more inspirational one, the one with a lot of creativity, while Dawn is kind of floundering. You kind of get the sense like you don't know, like he kind of mentions that the Jansen thing, for example, she's not going to be in the meeting, and you find out that like she helped with that creative. How much of that creative did she help with? Because she's the one who's been a little bit more focused while he's been all bogged down. And so that's something that I've always kind of wondered, because the show doesn't say it outright, but I would maybe put a pin on that. I love the conference room that they have. It's like the half moved in room. There's like boxes in the corner. And Matthew Weiner is just like, this is the real agency. Like, this is like the underbelly of like, everything's kind of out of place. I love how the chairs are all mismatched too. Like, it's just so like paper clips and bubblegum.
Scrappy
upstart. You don't say that to the clients, do you, Will?
I feel like we didn't talk about glow coat. I think you like brought it up. You're like, I want to talk about.
Yeah.
I was kind of going through it. Yeah. Glow coat. There's a lot to say about glow coat. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a cool ad. I mean, definitely shows that. I mean, weird to suggest that was like kind of Dawn's idea, or was that was that Peggy's idea for that ad? Like, to do something a little bit more.
They don't say
cinematic. Well,
Dawn says that it's like the movies, right?
Yeah.
That it's so telling that the time when he's in that interview at the beginning of the episode, it's so telling that he doesn't wake up and become illuminated until he talks about the ad, until he gets to say like, it's not really an ad, it's like the movies. And like, you see what he really wants to talk about is the work. And he is proud of this ad. He sees it though. Like when he watches it in the apartment, he does kind of act like he's watching it for the first time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, to the point where I was like, oh, is this even like there's a part of me I was wondering like, oh, is this like a different ad that like he didn't work on? But yeah, I think there is. Yeah, I think there is something sincere there. And like you said, it does kind of rejuvenate him in a way that's like, okay, like the Dawn we know.
Squeal.
Yeah, the Dawn we know isn't like gone. Like he's there, but he's a little bit more barriered, I guess, at this point.
Weiner has said that the glow coat did have ads kind of like weird back then, but also, you know, they did a lot of research it's an original ad. It's not a real one that they made back then. It's one that they did for the show. And he said it is very, very innovative for the time.
But I mean, part of me that makes me believe that this is Dawn's ad is that it's kind of mirroring his situation, like the idea that he's sort of imprisoned.
Get me out of here. Well, it also has the Western. Yeah. It has a Western motif too. And like, even like there's Western stuff that gets brought up with him all the time. The kids have a room that has like the swinging doors, like a cowboy. Yeah.
Yeah, but sorry, I didn't mean to cut Mike off.
Well, I would say also, like, I think it just also straight up looks like their kitchen in the house with Betty.
It does.
Yeah, and even
that's his grieving process.
Even the actress they got to play the wife kind of sounds a bit like January Jones, like when she's just like, whatever the kid's name is. I'll say Bobby for the sake. Like, Bobby, like, what are you doing under I don't know. It does feel very...
Glow Coat dries instant.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, now Glow Coat, I think, is dog shampoo or something like that. Who knows? I love Don's line where he's just like, trust me, Henry, everybody thinks this is temporary. Matthew Weiner said he almost cut that line. He said, I thought it seemed underhanded, but then the audience agrees so much with it that it works. Yeah, and then he was just like, how could Henry not take her side? Well, because Don is right. And I think Henry is kind of miserable in this situation.
Mm-hmm. As for the pitch, I mean, on the one hand, like, Don's not being a good admin in the sense of, like, he's not listening to a client very deliberately. Like, he's not really taking their wishes under any serious consideration. And he's just using that to kind of, like, stress that, like, it's my way or the highway sort of thing. But at the same time, it's not like what he's saying is wrong. And there is that kind of sense of, like, this company is kind of also stuck in the 50s, maybe even earlier, in that, like, women need to be chaste and, like, they can't, you know, like, they don't want to be running around parading in their underwear on the beach or whatever. But it's like, Don recognizes that moment, like, yeah, like, things are changing. Like, you know, the 60s are going to invite, you know, more free-spirited women who are going to, like, not maybe wear tops at the beach.
This is another fun trivia.
Yeah.
When he describes the ad to Jansen of like, oh, I think I know what you want, like this thing on the beach where people are throwing the beach ball. That's a literal ad that Jansen ran that year. And Matthew Weiner was like, oh yeah, I didn't pull that out of thin air. We took a Jansen ad from that pen and put it in.
Was anybody else kind of struck of the picture itself, like the copy, like being in color? I don't know. It just felt so much more modern than anything we had seen from Mad Men when they're like going through the decks.
Yeah, it's a very modern ad. That they said they pieced together the stuff for the ad from Sports Illustrated that year, the swimsuit issue. And it is like, it's a very provocative ad, but I think it's a very good ad. You know, I think like what's good about it is the creativity behind it. So that makes you wonder, like, did Don just do this on purpose? You know, of like, did he know? Because he had to have known this would happen, but maybe he was up his britches of like, this will be so good that even these prudes from the Midwest are going to like come along. Right. And the fact that they don't bruises him. And he's just like, forget this. Like, I'm just going to get out of this office. Like, I think it is a genuine response. I don't know if that's something, but he is so good at bullshitting that like, it is hard for me. I go back and forth of like, did he orchestrate this situation with that as a contingency plan of like, if they don't like this, I'm going to raise a huge stink about it. And because I want that to be part of this interview with the Wall Street Journal guy, to be like, oh yeah, we had these jokers coming into the agency, but we have these other clients, you know, who are kind of like, they're way better. You know, they actually listen to us. I don't know. It's a little bit of Don doing the PR though, that like Peggy and Pete and Joey were so like conducive to doing earlier in the episode. And then you see Don being like, all right, I want in on the action.
Yeah. I don't know if he put as much thought into it. I feel like when he's talking to Roger, that's like when everything clicks, especially because Roger, wait, was Roger the one that had the guy from Wall Street Journal, or was that...
that was Bert.
That was Bert, okay.
But no, that's kind of like where I usually fall. I go back and forth to what you're saying. I'm like, was it... I sort of wonder if he had that in the back of his head of like, this is how I might react. But I think it does feel so genuine though. Like, it's such an emotional reaction. It's tough.
Yeah, I just think it clicks for him, right? I mean, the episode opens with who is Don Draper. He has the date with Betty 2.0, right? So it's like he has all these options. It's really kind of heavy-handed, the messaging of the episode. And I think, yeah, he just in that moment he's like, fuck it. Like, I'm gonna go down this path. And then schedules the interview.
Fuck it, we ball. Donald Draper.
And then the episode ends. It's the same restaurant from the beginning of the episode. Which it looks like a hotel restaurant. And I just love the way this ends, where he's just like, is that who Don Draper is? He's like, yeah. You know, he kind of takes on a totally new persona. Like the 50s era Don is gone. And I love it. I think it's very, and then when it goes into the song, I have to re-look up the song. Do you have it? Tobacco
I don't have
Road?
the name. Yeah, the song's called Tobacco Road. I can't think of it because it's not the original artist. It's like a cover of it. But I think that's the first like outright 60s song we get in the show. I think like it's
No,
like
no.
well,
We got
in
a lot of 60s
oh really?
songs
I
in
thought
this. Bob Dylan has played multiple times.
Yeah, that's true. You're true.
I can't believe you right now.
But I mean, I know we had like the Decemberists as well, like which is like a
sometimes we get we get the anachronistic stuff sometimes.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it just feels like the most like stark as far as like the music, I guess, goes for me. Like it feels like the most like, and it's deliberate. Like it's supposed to be like Don's radicalized or whatever. It's like Don's taking no prisoners. Like he is reinvented himself seemingly or whatever.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Jamie Bryant, was the name of the costume designer that I failed to mention earlier. Sorry.
I was just gonna say it feels like such a nod there to the original pilot though. Like if Weiner felt like this was the reintroduction pilot, referencing the first pilot, which has everything to do with Big Tobacco and Lucky Strike, I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and now without Highlight, they're very reliant on Lucky Strike. There is still that foot of like, we're not fully into the future yet. We can't just leave everything. We still have this that's like holding us back, and they're in a very dangerous place right now.
It's an extremely untenable position.
Mm-hmm. Not a lot of Ling Price in this episode, but I'm just super happy. Like I remember when I first saw this that he was still in the show because I love Jared Harris, and I think that like he brings so much to this show, and so put a pin on what's to come with his character. Anything else though, guys? I mean, we covered a lot. Kieran Shipka, a bit more grown up in this. Like I know Will's like worried that she's going to burn the town down, apparently, but hey, I mean, I don't blame you.
I mean, not in the course of the next episode, but it'll
take a season at least.
It'll take. She has to get a little bit more into arson before that can happen.
Yeah,
but
we only get a little bit of Joan, but she still gets that great zinger with Harry, where he's just like, "Hey, this is my news about the Highlight special." She's like, "I won't even tell people after it." Great line.
The only thing I was going to say is, I mean, it's a little off the cuff, but I saw the new Mean Girls, and
okay,
I feel like that's the first thing with John Hamm I've seen, like a new thing, because I haven't watched like Good Omens
he's in that, huh?
Or the new season of Fargo yet.
Maggie Moore's?
Yeah, I haven't seen that, so I think that's the first thing.
Top Gun Maverick was just last year,
but I think that came out after we started the podcast, right?
What about Baby Driver?
Sorry.
No.
Sorry. What I meant was when we started the podcast, I hadn't seen any of the new stuff that Dawn, like from that point, like Good Omens or Maggie Moore's or the new season of Fargo.
Schmidt?
Confess Fletch?
Yeah, I haven't seen Confess Fletch. I'm talking about when we started the podcast and what John Hamm has put out.
Yeah, we started the podcast before Top Gun Maverick, I'm pretty sure.
No, I feel like I think Top Gun Maverick came out and then we started the podcast.
No, I don't think so. Because that was 2022. It was the summer of 2022. We started this podcast before that. We started it like I feel like we started it like the spring.
Well, in any case,
if only there was a digital stamp to our first episode that we could go look up.
I'll look it up.
Well, obviously Top Gun was filmed like a while back before it came out.
That's true. But also anyway, we also recorded like 6 episodes before we released the first one.
That is true. Anyway, what I was going to say is John Hamm is looking good. He's aging well, but it was kind of a whiplash moment watching, first 3 seasons of Mad Men and then seeing him close to today. I was like, whoa.
We released the first episode June 27th. I think we recorded it a couple months before then because we didn't release. I remember we released them in the summer, but we recorded them like early spring, I want to say, like April or something like that. But
all I wanted to say is that John Hamm, he's obviously older now, but he's aging well. That's all I wanted to say. And you guys crucify me.
I wanted to bring up, I like that Roger brings up that he's writing a book and he's like kind of brings it up with the journalist. Because that's the payoff, right? Because he was so jealous of Ogilvy's book last season. And I love that this gets brought up again. That Roger's like, well, now it's time for mine. Because he feels like he just should have done it before. I also think that deep down, Don Draper just wants to direct movies, honestly. And I think it's interesting. I noticed this the 4th time, but when Don mentions in the article, he's just like, oh, he got his facts wrong, that like I'm married and have kids and stuff. But if you really pay close attention to the interview, like the guy brings that stuff up. He's just sort of like Don Draper, married, you have these kids and all this stuff. Don doesn't correct him. Like Don is like not really listening to him, but he blames the journalist for getting the facts wrong, but it's Dawn's fault, not, so I think that's pretty interesting.
When is it ever Dawn's fault, John?
Exactly. Bethany mentions that she plays a courtesan, a woman of the night, and then Dawn later hooks up with a prostitute. I think that's always classic. I love the nervous laughter after Bobby says, I love sweet potatoes. And then I love the next shot because you don't see Bobby, but you see the Francis family who are so uncomfortable. But the nervous laughter that they have, I replay that whole thing. Baby Gene doesn't exist. They just write him out of every scene they can.
Thanks for reminding me about that. I kept texting you guys about that during where's Baby Gene?
Heart with Carla.
Who's Baby Gene?
Yeah, who are you talking about?
I really hope Baby Gene's okay. I was genuinely
Carla's taking care of him, so he's doing much better than otherwise.
I'm genuinely
But Betty
nervous.
even says that Dawn wouldn't take him.
Sure.
He's like, well, I still want to see him, and she shrugs. But it's their whole arrangement apparently is he doesn't have a place for Gene. It's kind of messed up.
Yeah.
His baby.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there's also Dawn's caretaker woman that we meet for one episode, and
yeah,
she
you
seems
don't need
fun.
nothing.
Yeah, she seems fun.
Yeah, she's a good time. She's a hoot. All right, that's all I had. Yeah, unless you guys have anything else.
Oh,
we'll be back. Go ahead.
I saw Fair Play as well. It was kind of jarring to see Harry be a competent businessman and then when I saw him in this episode fumbling and being himself, I felt a little relieved. I was like, okay. Yeah.
Well,
Rich Summer.
If you want a Jar and Rich Summer performance after the next episode, go on to Prime and watch Summer of '84.
Ooh. I thought you were going to mention the Judd Apatow love show.
Well, I saw a little bit. I saw most of that, I think. Yeah. But no, I mean, it's just kind of fun because he was also in Blackberry. He's also kind of a voice of reason in that comparatively. Yeah. It just was kind of those two performances of he's being competent in business. It's so I saw him here with his sunburned face and him,
when he shows up in The Office season 4, I think.
Yeah. Oof. He'll always just be the guy from Pam's art school.
Yeah. Well, that's where most people will be like, oh yeah, I know who that is. All right.
It reminds me of how what's Pam's fiance from Roy.
Yeah, yeah.
That guy.
Roy. Yeah.
David
that's
Denman.
what I mean. Whenever I see him and stuff, he'll just generally be playing a good guy. But I'm I don't trust this guy. He's up to something.
He's the dad in
Joyride.
Joyride.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
That's Roy.
That's what I mean.
But when you saw him, you were waiting for him to do some messed up stuff.
Yeah, I see him. And I'm he's gonna do something. Something ain't right here. Anyway,
I like David.
Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like him. Yeah. Bye.
We'll see you all in the next one for episode 2, which is Christmas comes but once a year. But this podcast only comes once a week if you're lucky. And so we'll see you all later.